Welcome, Professor Tony Smith.
Thank you. Very kind. Thank you. I want to thank you all for allowing me to come bend your ear a bit on this very important topic. If at some point, I talk with my hands a lot, so if I move the microphone away, just raise your hand and it'll remind me to make sure I speak into it. We are at an interesting crossroads in this country, and I'm going to give you just a very brief history lesson before we talk too much about gerrymandering. You might recall from your school days that we ended up with a Senate and the House of Representatives in what was called the Great Compromise, or one of the great compromises. We had other ones later on too. But the idea was the House of Representatives would represent the people and the Senate would represent the states. Now, how did we get to that weird form of government? We got it that way because we had big states like New York and little states like Rhode Island at the table to begin with. So Rhode Island was saying, hey, you got to have state representation at the federal level or we're just going to get screwed all the time. Nothing good will happen for the little states. And states like New York said, you've got to be kidding me. We're huge. We've got giant populations, and you're worried about a country or a state that'll fit in one of our boroughs. We've got to have it based on population. And the great compromise was to get the little states to sign on. So we came up with the Senate. So we get the Senate and the House. And there were a group of folks at the time called the Anti-Federalists. Now, don't get too hung up on that word because over time, what the Anti-Federalists wanted shifted back and forth a little bit. And it kind of, once upon a time, Democrats were the party of segregation and the Republicans were the party of minority rights. Then things changed, right? So don't get too caught up on the topic. But the Anti-Federalists almost left the Constitution. Some of them did, the Constitutional Convention. Patrick Henry, you know Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Honest to God, till I was 30, I thought he said that right before he got hung. Turned out, no, he lived to be a ripe old age. He had a life, but he became unimportant because he was an Anti-Federalist, and he left the convention. So the Patrick Henry folks wanted a Senate-style government and only a Senate-style government. The elites in government who knew better would pick the representatives. Politicians would pick themselves to be representatives, and we wouldn't worry with this messy mob rule of democracy. We wouldn't have to worry that people would vote in somebody who wasn't of the fine moral character and stature that the Founding Fathers thought they were. So this brings us back up to the modern day. Keep that story in mind. So we grow. There are more states. There's more people. Holy cow. We grow. And eventually we develop this notion that the House of Representatives is the people's house. People elect them. And senators are appointed by the state legislatures. And then we begin to look under the rocks and we see there are bugs in the dark. The states appointing senators became so corrupt, so problematic, that it wasn't a sustainable system and we had to change the system. And so we started making senators even be elected by popular vote. And my God, just any way you think about this moment in time, when we amend the Constitution to kill off state legislators picking senators, you think that's democracy. This is popular sovereignty. The will of the people will be triumphant at the end of the day. You would be overly optimistic if you thought that was what was going to happen. As soon as we elected senators statewide, shenanigans began in the House of Representatives. And that leads us to where we are today. So the term gerrymandering is a very old term. Eldridge, doesn't really matter. There's an old guy in Massachusetts, drew a district to make sure he got elected, and his name was Eldridge Jerry, and it looked like a salamander. So the press started calling it gerrymandering. There's no damn sense to this word. And none of the districts look like salamanders. So it's insanity. That's what we still call it. But nonetheless, that is what we still call it. So if I'm on. I'm going to talk kind of generally about this as a,
Remember, do you want
I was going to do the laser pointer.
It's that little red vertical line.
Oh, I got it.
Okay.
Good, there we go. So this is the nominal title, How to Measure Partisan Gerrymandering and Ground It in the U.S. Constitution. It's a lot more exciting than that, but I'll explain why that's the title in a bit. I have a team of terrific co-authors on this book. Anthony McGann is now at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. He was at the University of California, Irvine. Michael Latner was one of our graduate students, as was Alex Kina. Michael Latner is now at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is not only a beautiful place, but a fantastic college. And Alex Kina begins at Virginia Commonwealth University on a tenure track line in the fall. We are delighted with both of their success. So this is the book that we published with Cambridge University Press. It's called Gerrymandering in America, the House of Representatives, the Supreme Court, and the Future of Popular Sovereignty. We almost called it Revenge of the Anti-Federalists, but the press wouldn't let us do that. Now, I want to point out to you, this is a map of North Carolina. They have persistently tried to screw people. And this map keeps getting overturned and overturned and overturned, but I want to take it's going to be a little hard to see, I will confess. And it's hard to see because it is such a tiny line. But, so you see that kind of purple color district?
Yeah. Yes.
That's not the worst one in the map. You see this kind of darker purple one that I'm going on right now? That's a congressional district. There is a spot right up here where the district goes all the way down a street, in the middle of the street, and captures a house at the end of the cul-de-sac where an African-American family lives. Everyone else on that street is white. They put the African-American family into this district. It is about 75% African-American. It's Democratic, typically, and every one of these that touches it has gone Republican. If you had cut it like brownies right there, little squares, all of these would be Democratic. But by carving out the African American vote, they make Republicans win. So this is called cracking and packing in gerrymander lingo. And you see lots of litigation talk about cracking and packing. So what we mean is we have cracked a community up, take that line out of this community, and packed it into one community. So you remove the votes of the side you want to lose. And so now what happens? There's some consequences for this. The losers, Democrats in this instance, win their districts by 70% of the vote. They're overwhelmingly Democratic. Ain't no Republican ever going to win this district. The Republicans win the surrounding districts by very comfortable margins, 3%, 4%. It makes it in a normal election a safe district. Anything over 5 is thought of as safe in politics land. So you can have safe districts that would flip if you didn't have this cracked and then packed district. You follow me on this? So we used this map because it shows the lunacy of the representation scheme. So if you were going to ask North Carolina to represent its people fairly with a drawing of a map, hell, you'd never get to that. It looks like spirograph. Remember the spirograph? You'd squirt paint on the thing that spun? Looks like that. Or it looks like the goop under your shelves in your garage after years and years of brake fluid and stuff leaking onto the floor. This makes no sense from a representation standpoint. Now, what is gerrymandering? I just showed you a picture of it, told you the idea behind it, but here's a definition of it. It's drawing districts in such a way to make a particular outcome more likely. Or politicians are picking their voters instead of voters picking their politicians. And I will tell you, whoever is in charge tries to do this a little bit. Republicans made it an art form this last time around. It's the difference between the Maserati you see on the 405 going 130 and me going 80 in my Ford Explorer. The gas tank just goes, whatever. But anyway, so that's what we mean by gerrymandering. So let me give you a different little graphic of it. Imagine the red and blue blocked rectangle is a state. And it's got 50 districts in it. If each one of those districts just voted this way, 60% of them would be blue, 40% of them would be red. Blue would win the state delegation. In fact, if you think, well, if you have 10 delegates, 6 of them would be blue, 4 of them would be red. But let's say that you draw the districts instead of each one of these little squares, you just draw them like brownies. Just cut it like this, bing, 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 into 5 districts instead of 50 precincts. You would get 5 blue and 0 red. This would be gerrymandering to the benefit of blue. But you can also gerrymander to the benefit of red, even though, if you recall, red is a minority in the state. So red is 40% of the state, and over here gets 60% of the seats just by creatively drawing it like, you know, it's E's and C's. You follow me on this? So who draws the lines will dictate who wins the election. Now, one way to think about politicians. Politicians get a bad rap. People think they're sleazy. They are. People think they're shallow. They are. People think they're only out for themselves. They are. And that's the insight. Imagine if you're a politician, you are a single-minded seeker of re-election. You're a single-minded seeker of re-election. Even if you deeply, profoundly believe other things. Healthcare should be accessible. Black people should not be allowed to vote if you're in North Carolina. Whatever you sincerely believe, you don't get to implement it if you lose your damn election. So you have to be a single-minded seeker of re-election. So put yourself in the shoes of a politician. You might say, I don't want to do that, but I would tell you they're probably Jimmy Choo or Louis Vuitton or, you know, nice shoes. These people make a lot of money. They do really well. They complain. I can't live in Washington on this 6-figure salary, really? Really? Well, if you were in charge of drawing the districts, why in the hell would you make your district competitive? You wouldn't. You would go, well, I'm not going to make my life harder. I want to work on delivering the goods for my constituents. I'm not going to make it hard to get reelected. I'm going to try to make it easy to get reelected. So you might imagine some gerrymandering happens just to do incumbent protection. The incumbents, the people already in office, cut a deal with themselves. The districts are drawn at the state level, by the way, not at the federal level. So they cut a deal with each other and say, hey, look, you know, I practiced law in Georgia for a long time before I became an academic. And we raised money one time for a guy named Roy Barnes, who was running for governor and ended up winning. And Roy said he was going to run an ad, and he was going to challenge Newt Gingrich, that if you stop telling lies about me, I'll stop telling the truth about you. So, and we actually ran that on the radio a little bit, and it worked out. He was elected governor of Georgia, and there were a bunch of us at the governor's mansion the first night, kind of having a little bit of a party. And he said that his brother was mad and wasn't coming over to join the party. And I said, well, Governor Barnes, why is your brother mad? And he said, well, I asked him to bring a bottle of liquor with him because we're starting to run out. And he said, Roy, it's bad enough you're in government housing, but I am not going to start buying your liquor. So he's in the governor's mansion or something. So, but the point is, you can't expect politicians to make their lives difficult. So the cost of democracy might be tolerating some amount of gerrymandering. But it's like that Maserati in my Ford Explorer. how much gerrymandering is too much? Well, that's going to get us into a little bit of law talk, so bear with me. The court decided a case called Veith versus Jubilira in 2004. But this was not the first time they thought about the question, do people actually have a right to vote that's nested in the Constitution, the federal Constitution? And it's an interesting question. There's a case called Reynolds versus Sims from way back, really pre-civil rights era, but right around the beginning of the civil rights era, where the court said rural counties in Alabama don't get to be rover represented in the House of Representatives or in the Alabama state legislature. The idea that districts should have more or less the same population size, congressional districts, was tied up in the idea of, well, one person, one vote analysis. And it was grounded as a constitutional issue in the Equal Protection Clause. So the Constitution gives, I feel like I have a short leash here. The Constitution gives the states the authority to enact and run elections any damn fool way they want. That's why Oregon, it's all vote by mail. California, there's no excuse. If you don't vote in California, it's your own fault. In North Carolina, this past presidential election, if you were African American, it took you over 2 hours to vote. If you were white, it took you under 15 minutes, actually under 5. And the reason was the ratio of voting machines to population. So there were no lines in the white districts. In the African American districts, forget about it. You're going to miss half a day of work to just try to vote. So it's voter suppression. So the court in Veith said, deciding whether something is a partisan gerrymander is a non-justiciable issue. What does that mean? It means the court can't decide it. It's a political issue. The court should not decide it. And they said there's no existing standards for judging whether partisan gerrymandering is improper from a constitutional standpoint. Well, this isn't the first time this argument was made. The dissent in Reynolds versus Sims made this same argument. So since the 50s and the 60s and the 70s forward, the Supreme Court has been engaged in an ongoing dialogue about what are the parameters of partisan tinkering with elections. To what extent is the right to vote actually a right ensconced in the Constitution? And if it's there, it's in the Equal Protection Clause. All the citizens are entitled to the equal protection of the laws. And if the laws provide you get to vote, your vote can't mean more than somebody else's vote. If it's not there, it's because states have the right to set the way elections happen. Right? So this has been an ongoing dialogue at the Supreme Court for almost 60 years by the time this case gets decided. Nobody paid any attention to this case. There were some other sexier cases. Citizens United. Corporations are people. They can speak freely. Hobby Lobby. Corporations have religion. Really? Corporations have religion. How? How? Is it in the Old Testament? How does it even work? How does that work? So anyway, how do you give Hobby Lobby communion? I don't know. This is beyond my ken. It's beyond my understanding. But nonetheless, this dialogue that flipped which side was winning in Veith was largely ignored by the press because it seemed like a weird, boring case. And I will tell you the truth, they didn't know how the hell to say Jubilira.
Oh, jeez.
You get the ABC News guy going, well, I don't know. Do we have to go with that one? How do you say that? I can't read it. Right? So the consequences of the court's position were that in the redistricting, which happens every decade, in the 2010 redistricting, the minority party took the House of Representatives because state legislators were controlled by Republicans, and they super duper partisan gerrymandered. It was brutal. In fact, some of the gerrymandering was so bad that Democrats thought that this must be cheating. How could they have done this? They're winning everything, and they're winning 45% of the vote and getting 60% of the seats. How can that be? Well, the future of popular sovereignty is in jeopardy if the minority party can persistently win a majority rule. This is a not as extreme version of apartheid. It is disenfranchising people based on party alone. And, you know, again, Republicans happen to have done this. If the cards align right, where Democrats take control of Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Ohio and North Carolina and the governor's mansion and state legislature, you bet your bottom dollar they're going to flip it and they're going to kill off as many of these people as they can. Metaphorically, not actually kill them, sir. Don't want to scare anybody. All right, so here's a dilemma. How in the heck can you measure partisan gerrymandering? Is it like pornography, which the court says we know it when we see it? And then they watch it over and over and over again just to make sure? It's ridiculous. They have a viewing room for First Amendment stuff. Clarence Thomas has a popcorn machine in his office. And then how do you connect fair districting to the Constitution? Because remember, the Constitution sets up the parameters of our government. If the Constitution doesn't say you can or you can't do it, well, you got to come up with some other reason to do it or not do it. So how do you measure it other than just saying I know it when I see it, or it must be gerrymandering if my guy lost, my side is losing, it must be cheating. You know, that's not right. So, and how is it constitutionally grounded? Well, measuring partisan gerrymandering, in Veith versus Jubilira, Anthony Kennedy said, if only there must be a principle, well-accepted rules of fairness that should govern districting. He says, God, que lástima, for those who speak Spanish. Que lástima. It's so sad. There's just no way we could ever know this. It's unknowable. If only social scientists would somehow put their pointy heads together, climb out of the ivory tower, and think of something that's useful. Well, it turns out there's a partisan symmetry standard that was established pretty simply in 1994 by a guy named Gary King, who's at Harvard, and Andrew Gelman, who's at Columbia. And they proposed it in an amicus brief in a case called Lulac versus Perry that Justice Kennedy allegedly has read. Equal opportunity for partisan bias, and there's an implication of a majority rule standard. In other words, it should not always be the case that the majority rule prevails, because in any given state you might have variations. It might be that North Carolina is always going to be slightly Republican because more of it is rural than urban. But maybe not. And then it also has to be implementable by the courts. I know many of you are lawyers or former lawyers. Some of you are probably judges or former judges. When I went to law school, I had a friend that we used to bet. What's that guy going to do? What's that woman going to do? What are they going to be when they get out? And the slowest among us always got judge. Got to be a judge. Got to be a judge. Guy's going to be a judge. To say that it's understandable by the courts, that's kind of a tough bar to get over. It's got to be something really straightforward. If you say, well, all they have to do is go through these 37 econometric steps, they'll be able to figure it out. That's not going to happen. If they say, well, they only need to understand basic statistics, like maybe somebody with a master's degree in aerospace might. These are people who went to law school, folks. It's about tenacity, not genius. So you go, yeah, okay, the book's got 1,000 pages and no pictures. I'm still going to read it. Okay, you're going to be all right in law school. All right, so what's the structure? How do we do it? Well, partisan asymmetry after 2010, we just take a simple, it's division. It isn't even statistics. Seats over votes function. Function means division. That's all. There's nothing fancy about it. We take the 2010 census, calculate the election results from 2012. Now, we happen to have done thousands of computer simulations that show what happens as you randomly distribute the votes but move the percentage of the vote distribution. So what would happen? Don't worry too much about that. I'm going to show you some charts that'll show you what difference any of that makes. But by doing this, we can quantify partisan gerrymandering, again, you don't have to do the simulations. We're doing the simulations to show you we're right. All you got to do is division, right? Partisan bias and responsiveness to vote changes. Now, what does this look like? So the bottom line, the bottom axis, is the Democratic vote share, the share the Democratic Party got or would get. Each one of these little dots is a simulation. This is the margin of error. The dotty dots are a margin of error. The more solid one is where the line is. Just imagine it's there. So a proportional biased plan shows you here in Pennsylvania in 2012, the Democratic seats are this axis, the vote share is this axis. The Democrats got about 30% of the seats with 50% of the vote. If they got, let's go up here, 45% of the seats, they would, so you can see the gap between the dot in the middle, 50% of the seats, 50% of the vote. Anything away from that is proportional and biased. Over here is proportional and unbiased. You'll see as you approach 50%, you're approaching 50% of the seats totals as well. So as the vote total approaches 50% here, you're very far away from the 50% of seats. As the vote total approaches 50% here, you align pretty perfectly. All right? This was California in 2012. California, we have a nonpartisan districting commission that draws the districts. Two lessons from this. One, it is possible to draw non-biased districts. Ta-da! Two, drawing partisan districts or biased districts results in a negative democratic outcome, and I mean small democratic. The will of the sovereign is defeated if the people are the sovereign when the seats do not align with the vote share. A Democrat's votes are worth less in Pennsylvania in 2012 than a Republican's. Now, let's move on, look at two more. Then I'm done. I'm close to done with charts. So don't, if this is making you get vertigo, just look away for a minute. Happens to me all the time. Jersey. Anybody from New Jersey? I think there are some, but yeah, all right. So there's nothing quite like politics in New Jersey. If you used to watch The Sopranos or the Godfather movies or something, it's kind of like that. Like the rest of the country saw the governor from there, and we all thought he was a character out of a movie. New Jersey, they're going, yeah, that's how they are. Senator charged of corruption, yeah. 2 governors in a row going to jail. Yeah, well, you know, it's Cook County, what can you expect? But New Jersey, it's an unbiased incumbent protection plan. This is that first kind of deal I told you about. So how we know it's incumbent protection is see how it goes flat at the 50-50 spot? And then before you get to the 50-50 spot, it favors Democrats. But then once they begin to lose the vote, it actually begins to favor Republicans a little bit. So this is a deal that's cut between Democrats and Republicans that it's corrupt, but it's not unconstitutionally venal. They're dirtbags, but they're not trying to deprive the popular sovereignty of control of government. Now let's look over here in Massachusetts. It's an unbiased winner-take-all plan. In essence, because that line is so steep, the bigger vote share you get from the public, the better your payoff is. It's like the bigger the scratcher card, the faster you lose money. But the bigger the payoff is conceptually, whether it is or not. All right, so you can see up here, the math is not particularly important, but you can look at it, and I can do more in the quick Q&A. But you can see, so this is how we demonstrate. We did this for all 50 states, and we compared the pre-2010 to post-2010 redistricting. So here are the key empirical findings. By empirical finding, I simply mean one that I can show you with proof. I can show you evidence that is quantitative, that it just is what I'm telling you it is. So in a majority of states, there's no statistically significant bias. Most of the states are doing fine. The problem is we have this thing called the Electoral College. So the ones where we're not doing fine end up controlling the House of Representatives, and also through voter suppression, primarily not gerrymandering, can control the outcomes of presidential elections in profound and disturbing ways, as you may have noticed. So there's a clear difference between states with no bias and states with bias. Those with bias, they have very high levels of bias. The states with no bias, it's statistical noise. They marginalize it. So the national level, the pro-Republican bias in the House of Representatives at the national level is about 9.3%. In other words, Republicans get 55% of the seats with 50% of the vote. And it tracks. So if they get 48% of the vote, they're still going to get 53% of the seats. So we have orchestrated, institutionalized minority rule, unless there is a tsunami. We will begin to know tonight, after we see the returns, or actually by Friday, let's be honest. You know, the close ones we won't know till they count all the mail-ins. But we're going to begin to know what is going to happen in the fall. Here's an interesting tidbit for you. The Republican-Democratic vote spread, what Republicans get versus what Democrats get in California's primary, are a really good predictor of what the national vote spread will be in the fall, consistently for decades. That if you see the overall vote for Republicans versus the overall vote for Democrats, look at the spread. It's a really good predictor of what's going to happen in the fall. It's an interesting thing. There's reasons for this. If Orange County was a state, it would be larger than 22 other states. If California were a country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. So we are a better representative sample. If you take all the elections that we do in one night, we're a better representative sample of what people are thinking and are going to do than the rest of the country idiosyncratically responding to polling. So it's an interesting thing, but it's because of how many of us there are, as you know, if you've ever gotten on the 405 to try to get here at 5 o'clock. So partisan gerrymandering in the Constitution. Our challenge is to show that partisan gerrymandering violates the Constitution. Scalia said there's no right to proportional representation. Hell, there's no right to representation if the states don't want to give it to you. He's not there anymore. So, yeah. The majority rule standard, it doesn't require proportional representation, and it is implied by the concept of equal protection as contained in Article 1, Section 2. So our contention, and the contention that's being made in front of the court right now, is that Article 1, Section 2 demands equal protection. You have to be able to win an election if you won the election. It's not a crazy thought, although it could be construed as that. Now, forget the first half of the slide, too technical. So our assumptions are partisan outcomes of the House matter. Equal protection extends to the partisan result of House elections, and the House as a whole has to be chosen by the people as a whole. In other words, if the people vote 55% for one party and the other party wins, something's broken. You got to fix it, all right? I keep pointing it at the screen as if, it's down there. Right? Okay, that might be on the last slide. So let me talk a little bit about what's going on in the Supreme Court right now, and then I'll wind up and open it up for questions. So there is a case in front of the United States Supreme Court out of Wisconsin where Republicans basically controlled the governor's office and the legislature, and they said, how can we make Democrats an endangered species in the congressional delegation from Wisconsin? They super duper hyper partisan gerrymandered, and they admitted that's what they were doing. There's no mystery about it. Some people sued saying they'd been disenfranchised. Some Democrats sued saying they'd been disenfranchised. It went all the way up to Supreme Court, and they heard oral arguments this fall. As an academic and a lawyer, hey, what happened? Can you take it back to the slide of the book cover? It's like the second slide. Yep. Very close. Just hit enter twice. It should be spinning a little rainbow thing, right? Doesn't really matter. It's just the backdrop, so you won't be keep reading the same thing over and over again.
Is this just not working?
Yeah, the button quit working. That's all right. That's all right. That'll work. That's good enough. That's good enough. That's good enough. Perfect. Perfect. So the Wisconsin case, Republicans had just slaughtered the Democratic delegation. Oh, there we go. Getting in the right direction. There we go. Perfect. I always like to end on this just in the off chance somebody has a credit on Amazon, they want to buy the book. It's like $30. We don't make any money, but we like to sell them. Wisconsin Republicans wiped out Democrats, just about destroyed them. Really, really rough gerrymandering. And it goes all the way up to Supreme Court. And in oral arguments, the Democrats from Wisconsin heavily relied on our book in their briefs. They're making the argument. Look at this. They're right. Look at this stuff. They track the legal argument. We have a whole chapter. It's just a tracking of the history in the court of this argument between one person, one vote, and we stay out of political questions. So they cite it. And at one point, John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, interrupts one of the lawyers. And he says, I have to tell you, all this social science you're citing, it's gobbledygook. I don't understand any of it. So first off, wow, thank you. It's fantastic. I've been called names by the United States Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This is fantastic. They're going to put it on the back cover of the book if the Wisconsin plaintiffs prevail eventually. But so then after the oral arguments, we're cheering because we've been insulted by the court. You know, not many people can say that. He's a very decent guy. He's very polite mostly. So not very many, he doesn't insult very many people. So we're happy about that. And then the court did something fishy. They reached down and grabbed a case out of Maryland and added it to this court, to this case. And the case in Maryland is Democrats behaving badly. Martin O'Malley, governor of Maryland at the time, says, we really have to wipe out the Republicans from the congressional delegation. Wipe them out, he says. So the court reaches down and grabs that case, and they have these two together now. And they're going to issue an opinion soon, probably before the fall begins, they'll issue an opinion. And many people speculate, many people who are court watchers, who knows? You know, speculation, it's always, you know, I don't know, you ever do these things where you enter a pool for who's going to win what Oscar or something? I always lose all of these things. I'm just terrible at this. I'm terrible at this. So it's always at your own peril if you're going to speculate what the court is going to do. But many people believe the court reached down to grab that Democrats behaving badly case to make the ruling on the Republicans behaving badly case more palatable to Republicans. I don't know if you have noticed this, but our president seems to have a temper and a thin skin. I don't think they wanted to be tweeted at, whatever that is. I don't think they wanted to engage. Many of us believe they have brought up the Maryland case to make it more palatable when they tell Republicans you're not allowed to steal seats from Democrats. If they also tell Democrats you're not allowed to steal seats from Republicans. But I will tell you, the difference is this. The Republicans have stolen about 40 seats through gerrymandering in 2010. So, I mean, it's that bad. The Democrats have managed to steal one. See, Democrats are crooks too, they're just not good at it. It's like my car trying to speed. I want to go 110, I just can't. I try. No, I don't. But, oh, we're moving again. Good. I turned around. So that's where we are. And we're going to see one of two paths are going to open up for us. And then I'm going to open this up for questions, if you like. One of two paths are going to open up. Either the court is going to strike down partisan gerrymandering, and we will return to a time when the House is truly the people's house and is not simply the anti-federalist dream. It is not the elites in government at the state level picking who is going to be the representatives, but rather it will be the voters. Democrats are going to lose a lot of races. You know, if I don't know, y'all remember when the Democrats ran everything? This guy, Rostenkowski, stole stamps. What the hell is the matter with you? He stole stamps. He was selling them for like $100 a sheet. Are you kidding me? He got them free and sold them for $100. What is wrong with you? You're the third most powerful man in the House of Representatives with a super majority, and you're stealing stamps? What is wrong with you? You go back to the first conversation. Politicians, you just got to. It's like it's like the dog. You don't want them drinking out of the toilet, but you know they do. You know, this is just, they are who they are. So we take them as they are and try to get the best ones. So if the court says partisan gerrymandering has to come to an end because it does violence to the very nature of equal protection as espoused in the Constitution, it offends Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. It undermines the very purpose of the House of Representatives at all. If elites can pick them, we could have stuck with the Senate and just had one legislative body. And we could have had spectacular governments like they do in Brussels. Oh, wait. That's a really bad example. Or the court is going to retreat, and the court's going to do something very narrow. They'll say, well, we're not going to get involved. No one has standing, or this is moot because we've already had an election. Or there's going to be a new districting coming up, so we're not going to worry about it. All right? So the court may weasel out of it. There's a third option, but I don't think it's likely because Kennedy has already suggested, oh, que lástima, if only there was some measure we could use, the one you saw. We could find partisan gerrymandering is improper. It could be that Kennedy is unconvinced. And if he is unconvinced, we may get a kind of a stalemate kind of decision again, or the court may just say, we don't want to hear these anymore. I don't know if you know, if I say the word creche, you might know what it is, but it's the little Joseph and Mary manger scene that people put up around Christmas sometimes. Well, cities used to put these up just by themselves. There were a bunch of creche cases went up to the Supreme Court, and the court would do stupid things, just regularly. And it's not their fault. Individually, they're very smart, but groups can often fall into stupidity pretty easily. So they would say, well, this creche isn't okay because there's no other festive decor with it. So then the city would go, okay, there's a creche and a penguin. And they would go, well, I don't know, that sounds like winter. Okay, there's a creche, a penguin, and a menorah. Okay, fair enough. So you got, and eventually the court said, we're done with creche cases. Whatever line we say is the line in the sand, some jackass moves it's like your kids in the car, the back seat when they're little going, I'm not touching you. They get as close as they can. I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. So the court finally went, creches, we're not going to talk about creches ever again. We're done with them. Y'all figured it out. We don't care. So the court could try to say, we just don't care. This is too complicated. Math is hard. You know, that was a shining moment for Harvard when one of their more current famous alumni got up and said math is hard from the bench of the Supreme Court, which is essentially what it amounted to. When you say, all the social sciences gobbledygook, he's going, I just, division, what? I didn't know math was going to be on the test. This is really hard. So, of those three scenarios, for me, it seems most likely that they will say partisan gerrymandering is improper. And hopefully, they'll adopt our standard because it's the simplest one. There's a guy from Princeton named Sam Wang that has a literally 37-step calculation. He's a physicist who thinks he understands politics because he voted. or you know, I don't know. He's a very smart guy, does really well, good work, a lot of strong work, but his political science comprehension regarding what public opinion might, how that might react to things is a bit naive, what the political folks might say. I forgot this is being recorded, by the way. Hi, Sam. Love you. The point is, we have a way to return the democracy to our democracy. And we have to slay the anti-federalists again. If you've ever been to the South, you've probably seen occasionally there are Confederate battle flags up. In the hell? You lost that war as bad as you possibly can. You tried the violent overthrow of the United States government and you failed in every way, dimension, and possible scenario you could imagine. And yet we still see the battle flag up. Partisan gerrymandering is the anti-federalist version of the Confederate battle flag. It is a demand that minority rule prevail and that sovereign populations don't have a vote. So that's where we are. I'm an optimist about this. I think the court's going to do the right thing, and I think that if the court does the wrong thing, you might see a blue tsunami in the fall. They may wait until after the election to release this, by the way. Often people go, oh, the court's not that political. Nonsense. They heard oral arguments in Brown versus Board of Education twice to avoid releasing it before an election and because there was a change in membership. And it went from a first vote of 5-4, guy dies, guy comes in, to 9-0. Because the new Chief Justice said, do you really want to go down in history as a person supporting segregation? Do you really want this to be what every law school student the rest of time reads about? And that's the only thing they're going to remember you for. You vote against this case, it's going to ruin your history. It's going to ruin what people think about you for the rest of time. And that's how we end up with 9-0 Brown versus Board. So they're aware of public opinion. They're responsive to it. There's a lot of data out there. We can talk about some other time maybe. But with that, I'll stop talking and let you guys ask questions. Do you want people to come up here? Do you want people to go around? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's available in hardback, paperback, downloadable, used. I don't get royalties on used one though. Those are terrible. Highlights in them.
Wait for Ellen to come around. Remember, keep your questions short and tight, okay? So we can hear from our speaker.
So when the proposition that eliminated the gerrymandering bias in California where they set up the commission, is there a chance of that happening in other states? And also, are there any people that feel that was the wrong thing to do in California?
Yes, Republicans. Think it was the wrong thing to do. You might have seen this latest news. The Republican Party is now third in registration. So you are going to see, I believe, after this coming election, you are going to see a renaissance of the Republican Party in California where they are going to get serious about serious policy that is in California's best interest and try to win some of those independents back. Everybody does better if there's two vibrant parties, at least, maybe more. Other states have also done this, and everywhere that has put in a nonpartisan commission gets the same results California gets. So I don't know where we are. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Well, I thought I'd learn. You said I would, but I didn't, because as soon as you started, maybe I'm the only one, and you brought up the word delegate. You see, I always thought if we have, say, 1 million votes in California and 600,000 vote Democrat and 400,000 vote Republican, that we would have delegates who are the ones who actually vote when they're in the House for 600,000 in proportion to the board. Now you're saying this, what this gerrymandering does, it denies the popular vote.
Right.
Well, that's what I didn't know, and that makes, we should write letters to all these judges rather than to our politicians, if they can be honest about this. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be in the Constitution? Per delegates, not per the popular vote?
Well, it's not, I mean, it's driven by district, so that are drawn. So, but the original intent was that the districts would simply be a manageable group of people for the congressperson to interact with. So originally they drew them to be contiguous, close in. So basically one of the original premises, I think it was Hamilton, but it might have been Madison, said, you want to be able to get across it in a day on a horse. You can't make it so big that nobody knows anybody. So it really was supposed to be of the people in a real sense. But of course, let's not sugarcoat it too much, of certain people. So for some states, it was white male landowners. For other states, it was a little broader. When Colorado became a state, they went, wow, there are no women in this state. We better give them the right to vote and the right to own property. And then suddenly Colorado had a lot of women after the Comstock mine. But yeah. So I don't know where it was. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
There are a couple of states that have just been reprimanded by courts for the gerrymandering. Maybe one was Pennsylvania and Texas, I don't know. How does what happened there relate to your studies and what you're talking about tonight?
Right. So they are incredibly germane. And it goes back to that example I gave a moment ago of your kids in the back seat and one of them sticking their finger this close going, I'm not touching you. So many of the state courts draw lines and say, that's going too far. So the same guys, the same men and women that drew that line to begin with, go back in session and they do it again, except just a little bit different. So for instance, in Florida, the gerrymandering that got struck down in Florida, here was a clever thing they were doing. Counting prisoners in federal prisons and in state prisoners as part of the population for purposes of the district. Now, these folks don't get to vote while they're in prison. And in Florida, they barely get to vote when they get out. It's quite a complex deal to get to re-enfranchise, as you will. So felon disenfranchisement, huge in Florida. And proportionally, the folks in prison in Florida, you might have guessed this, aren't white. So they were creating racially, facially appropriate districts. Hey, there's minority representation in this district. They're a majority in this district. But only white voters, especially in North Florida. So from not quite to Tampa, but all the way up to Jacksonville, this was the way it was drawn. And this got struck down. So until the federal Supremes step in and say, okay, kids, separate or I'm pulling this car over, we're going to continue to see shenanigans at the state level, wherever there's unified government. And by that I mean a Republican governor and a Republican-controlled legislature, or a Democratic governor and a Democratic-controlled legislature. So, yes, sir.
Okay, according to your lecture, the state of Vermont and I think Wyoming would have a perfect system. Because
yes.
They each have 2 senators and 1 representative.
It is very hard to gerrymander out that one guy.
Exactly. However, people here in Orange County might object to the fact that the Vermont representative only represents 625,000 people.
There are more third graders in Orange County and LA County combined than there are people in Wyoming. There are more cattle in the Inland Empire than there are people in Wyoming. It is a problem, and it gets back to that problem of creating the Senate, where the small states, regardless of population, get. But so the answer to that, the non-glib answer to that is yes, the small states are way overrepresented in the Senate. On the other hand, if you could align Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, California, New York, and Texas, nobody else could ever do anything in the House. So if you could take the large population states, you wouldn't even need all of them. Put 4 or 5 large population states together and they control the world in the House. And remember this, taxing and spending bills must originate in the House. So the Senate is like your grumpy uncle who comes to Thanksgiving and has lots of opinions but doesn't control anything. And the House is really where the action is. The House controls the budgeting process, taxing and spending. You know, all anybody can do in politics is they can investigate, they can appropriate, and they can legislate. And that's kind of it. That's kind of it. They don't do anything else. So for the House, because all spending and tax bills have to originate in the House, they're actually much more powerful than the Senate, even though we tend to think of the senators as more important because there's fewer of them. Indeed, nobody in the Senate is as important as the Speaker of the House. And when you have a goofy Speaker of the House, you get paralysis instead of policy. Yes, yes, ma'am.
I have a question. If gerrymandering is grounded in Constitution, can be taken to court, then what about other political maneuvers, grounded or not grounded in Constitution, can be taken to court? For example, like the Electoral College, winner takes all the cast.
So the difference is, the argument is the prohibition on gerrymandering is grounded in a clause of the Constitution. So we actually make the argument, as do the people in Wisconsin and Maryland and other states that have sued, that it's unconstitutional. The Electoral College is in the Constitution. So we would have to amend the Constitution to get rid of it or skirt it. Some states, not many, but some states are passing laws that say whoever wins the popular vote in their state gets all of the electoral votes it's a little tricky. Whoever wins the popular vote nationally gets all of their electoral votes. So Rhode Island, I think, has just passed this, I think, but I'm not certain. But if lots of states did that, it would essentially, legislation by the states would eliminate the Electoral College from critical importance in the Constitution. But that can just be changed by legislation. That would just be changed by legislation. Yes, ma'am.
I recall some fairly serious discussion, and I believe it was in connection with a court case, about a standard for measuring the fairness of district lines that's based on geometry in terms of kind of the physical irregularity, you know, the ratio of length to width and these other geometric measures, that would be a standard for determining whether the lines were drawn fairly or not. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. So this is one approach. There are consultants that think this is the right approach. One of the reasons is you would have to continuously hire consultants to do the geometry. The constitutional defect in this argument, or at least the judicial defect, as an old litigator, the problem with that story is, where exactly in the Constitution does it say anything about the shape of districts? And the answer is it doesn't. So you would have to say we are imputing or imagining this is what the Constitution means. Now the shape issues, there's a guy named Keith Gaddy who's at Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma, is fantastic at this kind of stuff. And you can use that stuff to demonstrate defects, but it's very hard to take the shape of the district and turn that into a constitutional right. And in fact, I can suggest to you, it's insane to even try, because look at the shape of the states. If in fact that was something the framers meant, why does Florida look like it does? Is it a practical joke? I don't know. I mean, you could say, look, North Dakota, that's the only one they got right. Or Wyoming. But it's an excellent question. The press loves this because it's complicated and they can do cool drawings. But the end of the day is, how do you connect that to a constitutional right? Yes, ma'am.
If the Supreme Court does rule that the gerrymandering is invalid and should be corrected, will they actually order, or will they just say work it out, or will they actually give a standard that has to be adhered to?
That is a fantastic question. We might think of it as, how would this be implemented? Well, what they would do is they would say, here's the standard, and if you violate it, it's improper, and it might be struck down by the courts. And then it would be up to each state to figure out how to do it. Many states would, I think, choose to put a nonpartisan commission in charge of it because it would save them a lot of money on litigation. If they draw partisan maps after a court rules that, the court rules that way, then they're going to be faced with spending millions and millions of dollars on litigation that they may not win. And if they try to get too cute and get an advantage, despite what the court has said, it could end political careers. So if the court says it, we have this remarkable thing that happens in the United States. By and large, once the Supreme Court makes a ruling, the other branches of government abide by it. And one of the reasons is it's an easy excuse. They can go, well, it's what the court said we had to do. Now, it's not always the case, and ambiguity in court language can lead to various outcomes. But what would happen is there would be just political acquiescence, I suspect, by and large. Somebody might still try to be sketchy, but if you try to be sketchy when the court has said don't do this, the next time they tell you don't do it, they really will stomp on you. So the penalty might be worse. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I haven't heard you mention anything about Eric Holder and Barack Obama and their
Yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger has one too. One of these political action committees about getting rid of partisan gerrymandering. I'm a cynic. I think this stuff is good. It's good because it brings attention to things. When Eric Holder was Attorney General, would have been the ideal time for him to sue about these things. It's okay that he's doing it now, and it's great that he's doing it now, but they are all coming to the party a little bit late. The heroes in this are an organization called Common Cause, which is based out of DC. They actually gave us an award for an early paper of this, which we very much appreciated. We actually donated it was like $5,000 or something. We donated back to Common Cause to further the cause. And the die is cast. The Supreme Court is either going to ditch partisan gerrymandering or they're not. When they decided Veith, Kennedy did not, the Veith versus Jubilira, the one nobody can say, that's how you say it. Mr. Jubilira himself has told me that's how you say it. Or at least someone purporting to be him. But you never know these days. The court did not realize how profound the Veith green light to partisan gerrymander would be interpreted. Kennedy seems to have thought it was a cautionary opinion that would make governors and legislatures move cautiously and defensively, move a way that you could understand that would be defensible in the event. So it's a bit like the court has been unclear on whether it would step into partisan gerrymandering. So if you were going to partisan gerrymander, it acted as a restraint because we might lose, we might go all the way up, terrible things could happen. What if we have to redraw it 3 days before an election? It could destroy the party. We can't. So the uncertainty actually acts like a little bit of a brake on speeding. Once the court inadvertently made a very clear, bright line, this is a political question, we're not going to resolve it, which is what the four said. And then Kennedy joined them by going, oh, que lástima, if only there was some way we could measure this. But it's mysterious, it can't be known. It's like, what is a rabbit? Or something. I mean, it was remarkable that he acted like, and he had all the social science in front of him. The article that inspires our methodology was in the briefs. It's not like he didn't know about it. So what I think is the court didn't realize what a green light they were giving to partisan gerrymandering desires, and so now they're going to have to break it back, would be my guess. Yes, sir.
So if we do fix the gerrymandering issue, then the question about voter suppression, I should think, becomes a serious issue, since you can set it up in a variety of different ways to make sure that it's still equal. Is there any approach to dealing with that problem?
Yeah, we should punish people for voter suppression. The voter suppression is currently a very serious problem. And in this last presidential election, I think it's something like 68,000 votes in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Ohio made the difference in who won. And I got to tell you, more votes than that got suppressed. The latest study I saw said at least 300,000, more or less. It's like 285 in Wisconsin alone. So voter suppression is a real issue. But it's a little bit like when you go to the doctor and he says, you know, he always tells me, you got to lose weight, you got to exercise more. And I keep going, well, decide, doctor. Give me an order. I can't do both things. It doesn't work that way. We have persistent attacks on democracy from the people who want to run it for their own purposes. You know, if you could make your child a billionaire, if you were just a really bad governor or a really bad president, you might do it. If you could just, you know, think of yourself as a dictator, people might do it. We have to guard against the lesser angels among us that go into politics. And so we have to be vigilant, not just in gerrymandering, but in voter suppression and everything else. And some states are doing a great job. Oregon says everybody gets a vote. Just mail it in whenever you want. California says everybody gets a vote. Mail it in. Texas says everybody white gets a vote. Georgia says some of y'all get to vote. So we have to be vigilant about it. And if we fix voter suppression, there'll be something else sketchy. So, you know, we've got to be ever vigilant about all of the ways democracy can be torn apart. We have to hold our politicians accountable. We have to expect more. We have to fight against the tribalism of politics, where if my side is a rat bastard, it's okay as long as they're on my side. We need both major parties and all of the side parties to agree that we're going to hold people to a higher standard. So we're always going to have problems. This is a big one. We solve it, there's another one to fix. It's like you win a pie eating contest and your prize is more pie. Yes, ma'am.
Can you comment about the information we're getting about the next census and your president's comment and others in government about
They're going to do everything they can, yeah.
change not only the number of representatives in states, but also this issue as well by having immigrants stating whether they're legal or not and not participating.
Yeah. So the great thing about the new changes to the census are it combines gerrymandering and voter suppression. This is fantastic. It's a dessert topping and a floor polish. Does everything. The idea is that we will ask questions that will make people unlikely to want to answer it. We won't count certain people. If you happen to be married to someone of the same sex as yourself, you will not show up as married on the census anymore. Yeah. Doesn't matter what the Supreme Court said about that. We'll see, though. I think there's going to be litigation about the census. There are a tremendous number of large economic interests that care what the census says, and it has to be accurate. If you're United Healthcare, you need that census to be accurate for you to do proper guesses about who's going to live and who's going to die and where are they. If you are Coca-Cola, you need the census to be accurate so you know where to do marketing. If you're Chrysler-Benz, if you're Ford, if you're GE, if you're Sony Music, if you're Twitter, Google, Disney, you need the census to be right, because who is where is the foundation of our economic activity. So the narrow political interests that would like to suppress the census are going to be coming up against the large economic interests that do not want to suppress it. So we'll see who wins. Long ago, I had, when I was a young man, somebody pitched me the idea of running for office. And I was sitting in my office with one of my clients who was a very well-off guy. He'd done very well for himself. And he said to me, he had a very heavy Southern accent, he said, "Son, that's the goddamn dumbest idea I've ever heard." And I went, "Yeah, why do you think that?" And he goes, "Well, hell, it's cheaper to buy one than be one." You go down there to the State House and you pick you out a nice one and I'll buy them for you. And I never wanted to run again. And there's truth to this. There is some truth to this. You can look at NRA votes. You can look at net neutrality votes. follow the money. You'll know how your person voted on net neutrality. There's no defense for eliminating it. So, I don't know, hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Delightful. Thank you for having me.